Sorry, it's good afternoon for most of you. Good afternoon to you all. And my colleague Hande is usually doing these donor-related webinars, but she's on a well-deserved holiday and asked me to take over. So I'm afraid you're going to have to suffer through a terrible German accent for the next 20 minutes, half an hour. Amazon International is a social enterprise, and our mission is to build better NGOs. You know, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are now around about halfway. The United Nations General Assembly happening this week, and progress to most SDGs has stopped. Some is reversed. Only a few are actually sluggishly progressing. So we need to do better. I'm convinced that we do need strong, well-managed, fundamentally well-funded and financed NGOs to build the world that we all need to see and to help our fellow humans around the world. It is this generation's ability to do it, and I think we ought to live up to it. That last part, getting better funded, better financed, is what this webinar is about. Part of financing, and I repeat, only a part of the financing, should of course be grant-based funding for projects. And for that, you may need to identify the donors. So our mission here is to help you do that better, and then identify better donors, identify with that better opportunities, apply for them, and bring more resources to where you need them. I'm also pleased to confirm that since it's our mission to build a better, stronger civil sector, we are continuously working to make our services more accessible. And we have achieved this partially by training. And I'm pleased to confirm that training courses are not only back, in-person training courses all over the world. Jules will mention some of these ones later. But we've managed to make the in-person classroom-based training free of charge to existing Amazon partners. By 2030, we want to make them heavily subsidized or free of charge to most organizations around the world, so that we can build that capacity we need. All right. With that in mind, my name is Chris, and we're talking about donor mapping today. The talking points today are the basics of NGO funding, very briefly, so that we know, so we can locate this conversation. Then why we actually have to do a donor map, how to do it, and then how to use it. Pretty straightforward. Hope we find this good. Jules, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but the slides and the recording will also be posted online and the link circulated to all attendees. Is that correct, Jules?
100% correct. I did mention that.
Oh, you did mention that. So sorry. I should pay better attention. So you don't need to manically write. Maybe you can lean back, get that coffee or tea, and write down the questions into the Q&A. Good. Let's get started. Of course, building a stable income stream, a stable financial stream into your organization is sort of the basic of building a successful NGO, and that is in turn the basic for generating the impact that your communities need to see. So there are many areas and many aspects to build a stable income stream, but it's not actually rocket science. It's not magic. It can be done by a diligent, stable, and continuously working on it professionally. And the 5 top tips, and there are more, would be mentioned here, and they will also locate the donor mapping debate. Number 1. You do need a diversification of funding and revenue streams. You do need a clear funding strategy. Your funding strategy cannot just be grants. It just doesn't work this way. You would never have enough unrestricted money to fund all these important things that donors, institutional donors, just don't pay for. Things like training, learning, what we're doing here, hiring costs, only limited when they're direct costs. Things like innovation or trying things out, running a trial project for 6 months, or organizational development, building that essential database or that tool or that strategy. One of these things are usually paid for by donors, and therefore, if you do not have a diversified funding portfolio, you are likely have an NGO that feels a bit or looks a bit like a donut. where the projects are in the ring and they are more or less funded, but the middle of it is sort of hollowed out. So we don't want that. You also need a minimum reserve level. And with that, I mean unrestricted reserve. And that is very important for your donor mapping because it directs which donors and which revenue streams to target. If you say, look, we are a humanitarian organization, you probably need a bigger reserve level because you may need to respond to a humanitarian disaster before the donors do. If you are an advocacy-based organization or a development-based organization that works on multi-year long-term projects with a foreseeable revenue stream for the next 5 to 6 years, then you may be able to afford less of a reserve level. But either way, you need to set that level and stick to it. Third, you need a minimum management fee to be recovered or a gross margin for those who are financially minded. That minimum management fee is the non-direct costs. If before you ask, you need to set a level of earning, not a level of reserve, but a level of earning on your projects that you absolutely need to have in order to maintain a stable income stream and a sustainably financed organization. And this is very difficult because it means if we turn this around, you need to reject some donors who may offer you project funding, but then only 5% unrestricted. If you know that you need a larger percentage of unrestricted, and if you do not have any other income streams that diversify from that and give you that higher required earning on average, then you need to reject that grant. Otherwise, you're no longer an NGO, but basically an underfunded government agency. And that requires a lot of discipline, leading me up to number 4. Set those parameters and stick to them. It takes courage, a lot of it. Moving on, more pragmatically, there needs to be a system and a process and capacity to find, assess these opportunities for grants and commercial contracts, by the way. So just looking through a few databases and doing that spontaneously when your current project is coming to an end is not going to build you a sustainable organization. I think we all know that. So we need a system and a process to find and assess this. And you may also want search capacity for intense times, because we all know there's for 3 to 6 weeks there's no opportunities whatsoever, and then suddenly 5 are coming up and you need to write a lot of proposals. It'll be a shame to miss an opportunity just because you're running out of capacity internally to write proposals. So hopefully those top tips help you a little bit on the thinking. Any questions around it, please put them into Q&A, as my wonderful colleague Jules has said. Okay, quickly before we go into the donor mapping, we've done a bit of research this year. Interviewing is around about 50, it was actually more than that, but we're doing full interviews with around about 50 NGO partners. Amsterdam works with around about 200 to 300 NGOs per year. We've interviewed a third of those or so, just below it. And we asked them, hey, on your business development, you have achieved continuously high income growth. So their income has continually grown. Well, how much do you invest? And they have basically said, on average, I'm obviously summarizing here, we're spending around about 50 hours, so 40 to 60 hours per month, per country, mapping donors and identifying opportunities. So that's a lot of work. That does not include bid writing, program design, submission, donor negotiations, or anything. This is just identifying opportunities and mapping donors per country per month. So if you're under impression that you may not have enough opportunities in your area, technical area, in your geographic area, then, but at the same time, you do not invest considerable amount of time per month per country into identifying these opportunities, then that might be a correlation and a point to start. Good. Moving on. Let's talk about the donor map. So in the next 5 slides, I want to talk about donor maps. I want to finish them in about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we go through all the questions that you may have asked by then. If there are no questions, then we finish the webinar. But we want to make this a little bit shorter and make sure that we're respectful of anyone's time. So a good donor map aligns with your vision and your mission, with your opportunities and your funding bodies, the things I just said. And it aggregates information. What is it good for? Well, it gives you an understanding of what opportunities are suitable to be investigated further, so you don't waste time investigating an opportunity that is not going to, very likely not going to benefit you. That is a huge time saver. You want a good donor mapping tells you which donors are high, medium, low priority by the parameters that you set. By the way, it's not mentioned here, but it also makes sure it enforces your parameters. So you have a selection of opportunities. It gives you a prioritization of opportunities. Which donors or call proposals need immediate attention and which ones can wait till next week. And it enables your organizational strategic plan. So it looks beyond the call that is due in 30, 60, 90 days, beyond the short term, and you get a mix between long-term and short-term prospects. And that is always not just very important, but also very comforting to know. So you're not just chasing the next grant or the next proposal, but there's a long-term vision behind it. Particularly important if you want to diversify your donor base, you need a medium to long-term plan. So in summary, a good donor map is really the difference between constantly trying to fund your NGO, a bit like a rat's race, and a strategically sustainable funding for your organization. And that is a huge difference. Now, I need to limit that statement a little bit. Of course, a donor map is only the first step in doing so. You still need a process and capacity to write a lot of good, high quality bids. That is, of course, a part of it, but it certainly starts with a good donor map. Good. So how to do it? It's a pretty logical and simple process, actually. You just want to build a template, ideally cloud-based or on a platform, make it live accessible. So you're not emailing this around. This would lead to no end of problems. We've seen this before. You really want to incorporate your parameters. So the donors have a range of criteria as well, and eligibility standards, and your organization has specific capacities and obviously a specific mission to fulfill. You really want to make sure that you map those things and the design of the donor map. We're going to look at an example. So you reduce the time wasted on illegible projects, which is frankly just demotivational and costly. You want to research the donors. So the devil here lies in the detail. Which donor is investing more in the country in the thematic area that you're going to invest in. That we want to prioritize higher than those who are probably leaving, exiting, or not really have it on the radar. And you want to build that all-important prospect table where you summarize and prioritize the opportunities identified by your research. So far, so good. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Really important to know who and what it is you're mapping. Your funding strategy, hopefully you have one, should determine your ambitions. And the donor map should then help identify which donors can help you fulfill those ambitions, not the other way around. A fundamental management mistake in our sector is that we take the opportunities that are coming online by donors and we're building an organization towards them. That is not the way to A, maximize impact, B, fulfill our mission, and C, build a stable income stream for your organization. The correct way of doing this, and the more efficient way of doing this for sure, is to say, this is what our mission needs, this much level of unrestricted, this much level of diversified funds, this currency, etc., this speed, this much reporting requirements, and then prioritize donors that match with your ambitions. Really important. You really want to keep on a more pragmatic level the tool really accessible. Particularly if you are in a mid-sized or INGO, people from all walks of life, from programs, from executive, from proposal writers, from external agencies, may need to access that spreadsheet. You can do this as a simple shared spreadsheet that is updated weekly, but make sure that it is in one location and everybody accesses it. Really important, not evening it around. You may want to apply your priorities consistently here, so continuously updating it, plan a coherent approach to these donors based on your capacity requirements, based on your strategy, and obviously based on your local registration that you might have. So you might want to include a subset into your donor mapping for local registrations, which are different from country to country. You might be eligible for different things. One map is enough there to identify them all, because you can sort by country. So as I said again, make sure that your mission drives the donor map, not the other way around, and that that you're not seeking funding for funding's sake. That doesn't really make a strong NGO. So enough talking about the preparation. Let's have a look at how we actually do it. Once you have answered all these questions, what is your long-term, medium-term, long-term funding strategy? What is your required split between unrestricted and restricted? Which thematic areas need funding? Maybe you have some areas in some countries that don't need any funding at the moment. They are full. Which areas of your work are innovative, which might be attracting more new funding, new donors? What are sort of no-go areas? These donors we are not taking funding from, or they are below our financial or operative requirements. What type of donors are you looking for, and where do you look them for? You need to know all these questions and the individual question that this will break down to before you start building a spreadsheet. Really important. These questions are pivotal. You can, of course, start a donor map before and then delete the ones that do not apply, or that shouldn't be on that list once you've answered all these questions. But again, that is a bit of a waste of time. So I highly recommend answering these questions beforehand. Okay. Then you need to launch into the donor research. There's a few tools. You could, of course, outsource the whole thing, but you can also do it yourself. You need to research and list out your existing donors, your partners and foundations. You need to research your competitors and your peers, what they have for funding. That's mostly public information anyway, at least a year and a half later. And then you can explore the donor funding websites themselves, or go on these portals. I've listed a few here with links, so when you skip the slides, you can just click on them, or you can copy them here. And usually it's a combination of those. At Amsterdam, we do a lot of funding research for a lot of organizations on an everyday basis. So we do this for several organizations. And we basically are operating on a very large database that automatically populates itself from the donors website, from the events that they do, from these portals that I'm listing here and a few others, as well as press releases, speeches, to identify those bits, those opportunities that haven't been turning into concrete opportunities yet. You can evolve something similar. This is not rocket science. It takes a long time to build it. But if you have a system that I described here like this, then you are probably better at systematically identifying opportunities as they arise, or even before they arise in our case. Or you can just outsource the whole thing. It's also done a lot. Right. And then comes the moment you've all been waiting for. We're actually putting the prospect table together. So as I said, it's a live and constantly updated document. It's a living document. It needs to be revisited regularly, activated weekly. It needs to be accessible by all that you need to work with, including maybe even your partner organizations. You should prioritize those that have the highest potential, the highest long-term value. That may not be the next opportunity, but it may be that big opportunity in 6 months' time. So this prioritization allows you to work more strategically, to say, no, we're not going to write 2 more small bits just because they're due next week. We're going to use that time and focus on the on the big harvest, on the big opportunity in 3 months' time. So it's as much about immediate opportunities as it is about long-term strategy, and it dictates your networking strategy as well. Very important. And then you may also want to do a stakeholder network mapping exercise. If you're working in a medium-sized organization, you probably have more connections to donors than you realize. And a stakeholder mapping exercise can be incorporated into this prospect table as an additional sort of section of it. And where you just ask all employees, past employees, board members, some key individuals you know well, and maybe your alumni or your even your interns or so from ages ago. Who do you know? Who do you know by second degree? Do we know that we can talk to through you? I'll give you some examples on the next slide, but adding a stakeholder network map to a prospect table donor map is a really good way to not just identify published opportunities, but also sort of see those network effects. And usually people are more than happy to share in our sector. So particular board members and staff, they're usually quite happy to do it. Okay, here are a few examples. I've got a simpler example in the next slide for you, but you can already see that you have the names on the left-hand side here. This is from an assignment a few years ago. Maybe you have a contact, what kind of prospect it is, possibly a deadline, commentary about the next steps, quick description of focus, website links, typical amount that you might go for, applications you have done, has there been successful or unsuccessful, and it goes on. And we used here a simple spreadsheet, as you can tell. Here's another idea. So very simple categories: application name. This is not by donor, but this is by application name, whether it's been pending, application in process, what type of application it is. Has it been a call for proposal? Is it just a concept note, or have we actually just sent a letter of inquiry and waiting for feedback? What duration it is, maybe what the amount we've asked for, what amount we got, and how we applied for it. And towards the right of this one will be the next steps as well. So once it gets to the prospect table, it all goes very quickly. You can do the stakeholder table in the same way. And a even easier template that you can see in the slides when you get them is simply the one you see here. As long as it includes the various details, the deadline, the status, the next steps, and possibly some contact and some focus area, you are pretty much fine. You can add as many columns as you like. Who is responsible for the next step? Maybe there's a waterfall management saying where you can say, if this then that automatically updates. You can make it as fancy as you like, but this template is probably 60–70% what you're going to end up with. And it needs to have a degree of simplicity to actually be useful. If you have to enter 20 fields after you've come across a new opportunity, then people will be less inclined to actually do it. So sometimes less is more here. Okay? Hopefully that makes it really tangible. So I also want to share with you some lessons we've learned from mapping a ton of donors over the last 12 years, 13 years. You do want to invest a lot of time and human resource here. It cannot be done by AI, not yet anyway. You do need around about 4 hours a week on that. So it's a big job. And maybe getting the first donor map up is even a bigger job. Seriously consider outsourcing the first part of it so that you have a strong start. Keep it simple and accessible. As I said, something like I just showed you, really simple, 10 columns max. Keep it intuitive. If your donor map is so complex, and we've seen some complex donor maps that has an instructions page up front, then again, your staff will be less likely and your colleagues might be less likely inclined to use it because it's just too complicated. If they can make a phone intuitive to use, we can make a donor map intuitive to use. Share with a larger team, but you may only want to give admin access to a few so that they don't break the logic of the columns. You know, you have you may want to have a bookmark folder with those regular opportunity websites, databases to consult, so that you have a list of those. It's easier. You can also create free Google alerts for the most relevant calls. That's very useful when the donor has talked about a certain keyword. Be careful with the keyword. Don't make it too wide. Otherwise, you get a lot of emails from Google Alerts. Google Alerts is free of charge. You can Google that. You may want to develop a process across the team to keep the prospect sheet up to date. It cannot just be done by one person, because if that person falls sick, unavailable, demotivated, or leaves the organization, then the whole process is dying with it. So you absolutely need to develop a process where the prospect sheet is up to date. Internally, we are doing it by donor. So that whenever there's a new update, say about USAID or about the Robert Bosch Foundation, then that person is updating the prospect table for that donor. And that's a really good way to get to know the donor, but you may not have sufficient people in your team to split out the donors. And you may want to invest in 1 or 2 subscriptions to the most relevant donor databases. But before you do, you can also use their free trials. If you do want to do that, they cost between $50 to $600 a month. There's various subscriptions available, but bear in mind that they are not going to solve your problem. They are providing you the information. You still need to read and do that lots of work. Or, as I said a couple times before, you just outsource the whole damn thing, and then you can save yourself the money on that. Okay, that's pretty much donor mapping. I think, Jules, you got a few announcements. Is that correct?
I do, Chris. Thank you. So just letting everybody know that our training courses, in-person training courses, are back in full force. We have locations set around the world over the next few months, and we will be setting up new locations. We are offering 3 training courses: Right Winning Proposals, NGO Financial Sustainability, which has been slightly updated, and I will be sharing that with everyone post-webinar. And then also Right Winning Proposal Budgets and Monitor Project Budgets. So we are very excited to be hosting these around the world, and we recommend that your organization signs up. All the details are on our website under training courses, including the course fees and the registration page. So please do sign up. We would love to host you. Do you mind hopping to the next slide? We have upcoming webinars, so remember to always check our webinars on our events page. And the next one is Write Better Proposals to Secure Better Funding. So this is also always a very popular topic, and we look forward to seeing you there. So please do click on our website and sign up.
Super. And that should be the last slide. Let's go over to the Q&As. How many questions and how much time do we have, Jules?
We have about 10 minutes, and at the moment we only have 4 open questions. I have been able to answer quite a few of them. So
great.
Luke has asked us, many donors, large foundations, do not list their future grants and only work with partners. How can an organization understand possible prospects in this situation?
So Luke, it's a really good question. Donors, much like any organizations, do not just come up with grant opportunities out of nowhere. They usually discuss them for a while, and there's usually a donor strategy behind them. So number one, you can check out their donor strategy, and then ask yourself what kind of calls to expect. Sometimes the strategy is more general, you know. Rockefeller Foundation is pretty general, for example. Sometimes it's far more detailed, like the Bosch Foundation or the Gates Foundation or the smaller foundations. They tell you which country they want to do how much over how long time. So you can sort of foresee what's going at. For the large institutional donors, you can check out the USAID business forecast or the interannual updates from the European Union, where you can say, see what's coming up. So for example, for USAID, we all know now that they have been a bit sluggish with their commitments over the first 6 months of this year. So for the next few months of this 2023, they need to push out a lot more grants. And you can go through the business forecast there and actually see all the things that they have done so far. Take that off the commitment that they want to publish or want to commit this year. And then you do the math, you know that there's a lot more coming. For the European Union, is very different. You can use these inter-annual updates there. And lastly, you can listen really intently to the press release that are coming out every week. It's a lot of work. You know, maybe use those Google alerts to help you that I've mentioned in the webinar. And then get an impression of where you are. Now, this is all very, you know, by itself, very clear. In summary, that is a lot of work and needs to be professionally organized. And it's been my experience that doing that for a mid-sized organization is pretty expensive. It's pretty much a full-time job. So even though I do say so myself, you may want to consider outsourcing all that because an organization that specializes on that and knows your organization strategy is likely picking up far more than you could ever do internally.
Great, thanks for that answer, Chris. Luke and Rose have asked about the website, so I'm just going to put your questions together. Which donor database websites are best for large foundations? DevEx funds for NGO? ? And Rose asked, which of the funding opportunity websites do you think is best? So same.
So again, the funding opportunity websites are a good starting point for you to identify possible funding. There's two problems with them. Number one, they are mechanically driven or they're algorithm driven. So they will copy paste the public information from the donor and automatically put it into their database for which you then pay for. So in a way, you're paying for public information, but they provide you added value by imposing better search algorithms by country and by history, and they enrich the information. DevEx is pretty good on that. Triple funds I can strongly recommend here as well for those foundations in particular. Funds for NGOs, the United Nations General Marketplace is pretty good here as well. But the problem that most of our partner organizations have is actually going through this one by one is a full-time job. And that's where the real value lies. And that is where the problem is with most organizations, that they don't have the capacity to just do that.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. Faith has asked us, how long should the map list be? What is really realistic?
It's going to get ever longer because sometimes, and quite often actually, donors are publishing an opportunity and then they have to stop the procurement or they have to stop the award process for whatever reason. But you still want to, you still know that that opportunity will come to the market, you know, in the next 3 to 12 months. So you don't want to take it off your donor map. So internally at Amsterdam, we are using a system that we're just putting this as red, saying, you know, for now, or yellow, for now it's not interesting. We're using a traffic light symbol system here. This is not reasonable. This is not ripe yet for attacking, but let's not forget about it. So your donor map will horizontally become ever larger. Obviously, once you've submitted something or you decide not to go for it, you might want to delete it. But the important thing is that it becomes vertically really limited. 10 columns, done. So you should be able to see it on one screen, not making it too complicated.
Great, thank you, Chris. What do you recommend when doing a donor strategy map for unrestricted funding?
Don't.
Thanks, Lily.
This is my answer. So unrestricted funding is, the donor maps specialize on institutional or institutionalized donors. If you are going for purely unrestricted funding, it's a bit more like fundraising. You need a fundraising approach. So it's more of a customer relationship or fund-donor relationship management process you're going there. Of course, if you're going for VIP and high-value donations, you can list them out as a prospect and then continually work on them in this customer relationship management approach. So it's a very different way of funding your organization. You absolutely need it. But you know, Alina, to be absolutely clear, what we are talking about here is institutional, mostly accountable grants and or commercial contract opportunities. Let's not mix those up.
Great, thank you, Chris. Sylvia has asked us, well, she's sent us a question. A challenge we face in our organization, a digital-first health communication NGO based in the UK, is that we develop products and partnerships that are not country-specific. Do you have any insight or thoughts on how to circumvent the country specificity of several donor investments? I know, sorry, tongue twister, of several donor investments.
Sylvia, thank you very much for that question and tripping Jules up. That's much appreciated. So the if you do not have a country specific solution, then that's actually a great advantage because you can apply that solution to your circumstances, regardless of country. We have a lot of NGOs as our partners at MZN who also have non-country specific solutions, often in the digital space, not always, but also advocacy space, things like that. They can be applied in very different settings on countries. So you just do the donor mapping the same way, but you may need to still sell it to a donor on the basis of a country. So I don't know anything about your organization or what product it is you are running there, but presumably, hopefully, you can at least focus the application or the solution on a particular geographic region and or a country. So that will help you in the business development side. It's actually great because you can then use it as a credential and hopefully convince the donor or other donors to do something very similar in the next country.
Great, thanks, Chris. We just have time for a few more questions. So there are a few popping through.
Can I just say one more thing to the country specificity? There's also, you may want to look at the innovation donors, the challenge funds, the innovation funds. They are not they're not called to proposal, but you can submit one at any time, and they are not country specific either. So that's innovation funds, the challenge funds. They may be a good source of funding for you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Tanya has asked us an interesting question. Can you share your thoughts into how AI will play into this? Interested to know how we should adapt because of the help of AI will increase the number of applications sent to funders.
Every webinar these days, huh? AI. So Tanya, hopefully you're subscribing to the MZN newsletter. We've just done an article on using AI in proposal writing. So I'm not going to repeat what we said there because you might have read this already. In terms of opportunity identification, we've had specific, AI for a long time. The keyword matches at certain portals got better and better and better. And simultaneously, the matching of these opportunities got worse and worse because donors are completely overworked. You may have heard about the massive understaffing at USAID, the considerable understaffing at the European Union as well, or at the GIZ. And that means that they are putting funding envelopes are getting bigger and bigger. So they only have to go through one procurement or one grant award procedure, lumbering countries together and themes, and the titles get ever more vague, like, strengthening for humanity. I've read earlier today. What does that mean? And that included livelihoods, justice rights, migration, and food security for 4 countries, all under one call for proposals, and NGOs can apply for a specific part of it. Now, here's the problem. AI and these donor bases are really bad at understanding that a sort of framework call or a larger envelope could apply to you. So the second part is, at the moment, AI is only as good as you are prompting it. It provides superb results if the prompt is really, really good. But in a way, we're all programmers now. We all have to be, if you want to use AI, you have to be really specific about what it is you're asking, and then it's providing interesting and valuable results. Sometimes, however, by the time you formulate your prompt, you may as well have done the search yourself.
Great, thank you, Chris. AI is definitely the talk of the town at the moment.
Really, I mean, it's a fantastic. I'm sure it will get better and better, but the problem of, we need to be very clear about what we are asking it to do is absolutely important. And I think there's a huge risk of this AI hallucination where it sounds very convincing, but sometimes it's just not true. It makes things up.
Thank you. We have a question from Gulden and Ayub. I think they are of the same organization because they've both written it. So I think we definitely need to answer this. Could you please tell us more about the things that scare off future donors? Things not to do when we approach them.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some research with the European Union a few years ago, and I tell you what was really shocking, for over 20%, so a large percentage of the submissions, we couldn't tell you what it is the donor is funding. The problem description was good, the country's prescription is good, the writers, I mean, these were anonymized, so I can't tell which NGO it was, but the writers' understanding of the problem was really, really good, to a point that they came across to me as, you're really admiring the problem here, be that water, be that wash, but I couldn't tell you what they're proposing to do about it. Where's the milestone plan? Where's the concrete investment? What is the return of the investment? So I think one thing that scares off donors really well is when you have a very good understanding of the problem, but not so much a good understanding of your solution. And because NGOs always think, because all experts basically in all walks of life think that everybody, you know, is as good about the solutions as they are and know about it as well, that doesn't necessarily mean you're communicating it well. So make it really clear that by which time, what impact visible. I would just put it left impact by 6 months, by 12 months, by 24 months, by 5 years, by 10 years. And then put the impact through this on the right-hand side. That makes it really clear, just a tip. The other one is the budget. Another whopping 30% or so, the budget was just wrong. There were arithmetic mistakes. There were things that didn't comply with the financial rules. There were things we didn't understand. Like, you know, the narrative talks about 20 staff. The budget has 18 staff in it. Why is that? So if you do that 3 or 4 times, then the donors really says, you know what, I'm not gonna read this proposal anymore.
Great, thanks, Chris. We have 4, I think, quite quick questions and 2 minutes left. So let us try get through them. What would you advise an NGO or a new NGO to do to fundraise?
Okay, have a real good plan. We have a really good plan in action, and deciding all the questions that we put in the slides. You know, what funding do you need? For how long do you need it for? The answer is as much as possible, as fast as possible. It's not really convincing.
Faith has asked us proactive fundraising versus reactive fundraising. Which way to go or map?
Really good question, Faith. So I assume here that as reactive fundraising, you mean things like there's an opportunity, let's go for it. There is merit to this. This sometimes works and sometimes we do. But then the question is, if there's an opportunity that is really, you know, getting you all fired up and you want to go for it, the question as well as, why didn't we identify it earlier? You know, then clearly our opportunity identification is not as good as it ought to be. There shouldn't be, in a good funding process, opportunity identification process, many opportunities that come out of the woodwork unannounced and are a really good match. So that's maybe a slight thing. If you go for it by all means, but beware of the opportunity costs. As I said in the webinar, we see many NGOs that are really, really, really keen about the next opportunity that is due in 4 to 6 weeks' time. Everything, all hands on deck, let's mobilize, let's do it. And then they forget that just 3 weeks later is a much bigger one. So we do need to play a strategic game here somewhere, and the donor map helps you be more active about it.
Great, thank you, Chris. I think that's all we have time for today. We have gotten through a lot of content and a lot of questions.
Super.
Thank you to everyone for joining us. We will be sending the slides to you by tomorrow morning, and everything will be on our website later.
Fantastic. Jules, thanks very much for running the show here.
Thank you so much, Chris, for hosting another fantastic webinar.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and be in touch soon.